Shalom, and welcome back to By His Grace Marriage Ministry Podcast. My name is Amanda, and I pray that you all are off to a blessed start to your day. And it is very, very early as I'm recording this. It's actually only 5:30 in the morning where I am. So depending on when you all listen to this, I pray that you all are having a blessed day. So forgive me if I am not speaking as loudly as I normally would. Again, it's very early in the morning here, and I don't want to disturb anybody. But this word just came to me very, very heavily to the point that I needed to get up and share this word, record it, and publish it. And, it's really something because the topic that I'm going to discuss in today's episode, I have been praying about a lot, and I've been doing a lot of research, both within the scriptures and in various of other places, because this is a topic that has been of interest for me for some time. As someone who studies marriage throughout the scriptures, I knew at some point that this topic would come up because of the accounts that I've seen in scriptures, especially the more that I read and study and dive deeper into the Apocrypha, that there's more details being revealed and shared within those books. I've noticed more and more about this topic, and it's really been of interest to me because, again, someone who has been studying marriage for as long as I have throughout the scriptures, it has crossed my mind a few times. And the thing is that we don't really hear of any other marriage ministries or churches or anything actually discuss this topic as to why this seemed to be something that was not only took place often, but seemed to be accepted. Whether or not it was pleasing and honoring in Yahuwah's eyes, I'm not sure, but it was accepted amongst the culture at that time. And even with having the Torah, it seemed to be something that was okay to do, I guess. So, with that being said, so what I'm leading up to is the topic that I'm going to be discussing today is polygamy. Now, again, this topic may be strange to most, or a topic that is avoided because, as majority of you know, in our day today, or in our society, it is illegal. Okay, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So it's not something that we see in our culture today or in our society. It's also illegal, and it's just not common, right? But when we look at the scriptures, especially within the Tanakh is Hebrew for the Old Testament, we see that it was very common, very, very common. It seems the more that we go into the Brit Hadasha, the New Testament, it didn't seem to be as common in the days of Yahushua's ministry. So again, we'll go into more of that as I go along, but I want to go ahead and just kind of share a little more information to just get a better foundation of what exactly is polygamy and so on and so forth. So I want to first start by saying that polygamy is not the same as someone who divorces and then remarries, or someone who has become a widow or a widower and then remarries. Polygamy is not the same thing, okay? So I want to just share a few definitions with you. The definition of the term polygamy is the practice or custom of having more than one husband or wife at the same time. So that's the difference between polygamy and then someone who has had multiple spouses but not at the same time. So meaning they've married and have divorced and remarried, or They married, their spouse passed, they became a widow or widower, and then they remarried again. So that is the difference. Polygamy is having more than one wife at the same time. Being divorced and remarried, or widowed and remarried, you have more than one spouse, but not at the same time. Okay? So under the, let's just say, umbrella of polygamy, there's a couple of more terms. So there's polygamy, which that definition is where a man has multiple simultaneous wives. And then polyandry, which is where a woman has multiple simultaneous husbands. Okay? So as I have read the scriptures and just kind of researched through the scriptures, it seems that, again, this was a common practice. This was common within the Tanakh and the Apocrypha, but it was more common to have seen the polygamous marriages, but more so polygyny, meaning that it was more common that the men had multiple wives. We don't really see at all any wives that had multiple husbands. And I will share towards the end of the episode my theory, my opinion of why that is, why polygamy took place, why it seemed to be allowed and accepted, and why it was more polygyny than it was polyandry, which means it was men with multiple wives and not wives with multiple husbands. Okay, so in the Tanakh and the Apocrypha, we see examples of polygamous marriages all throughout. In fact, Lamech was one of the first men before the flood, before the time of Noah, that had two wives. He's the very first one we see in the Torah or in the Tanakh that has two wives, okay? Other examples is Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Esau, David, Noah, Hannah's husband, and I can't remember his name right now. And not only did they have wives, but they also had concubines as well. King Solomon, David's son, one of David's sons, was one that had many wives. And I mean, he had wives from all over. Okay, he had many foreign wives, which actually ended up being the cause of his fall. So we see this being very common and fairly accepted throughout the entire Tanakh, right? Again, as you go further into the times of YHWH, so into the Brit Hadasha, polygamy didn't seem as common. We don't really see any accounts or examples of any men that had more than one wife, right? We don't really see that too much anymore. So that's one thing that I discovered as I studied this topic throughout the scriptures. It was definitely common, very, very common in the Tanakh, but not so much in the Brit Hadasha. In fact, there's whatever scriptures that are pertaining to marriage within the Brit Hadasha, which were mainly by Paul, they seem to be worded in a way pertaining to a one man and one woman marriage covenant. So we really don't see any examples or traces of polygamy within the Brit Hadasha that I've seen. So maybe other than maybe, again, divorce and then remarriage, or widowhood and then remarriage. But we really don't see polygamy very much throughout. So the question that has weighed heavily on my mind as I've studied this topic, and I'm sure those of you that have maybe thought about this before as well, or as you're listening to this episode, is, why was this allowed? Is polygamy a part of you was designed for marriage, or is it man's? Because I know for me, especially as I first started out studying marriage Yahuwah's way, through the scriptures, my understanding was that Yahuwah created a marriage covenant to be one man and one woman. And we see that because of the first marriage, which was Adam and Eve. But the more that I studied this and the deeper that I went, I started to realize different things as well. So when we dive into the Torah of Moshe, so we know that Yahuwah gave the 10 words or the 10 commandments to Moshe. Moshe gave them to Yisrael, along with the Torah. So along with other laws that were given, right, through Moshe. And so when it comes to the area of sexual defilement within the Torah, we see that a lot of that had to do with like homosexuality, bestiality, and even incest, which is interesting because when you go as far back, starting after Adam and Eve, so starting with their children, all the way up to the days of Noah, we see that what we would consider to be incest took place a lot. Because think about it, Adam and Eve had their children, their sons and daughters. The only way for them to have had procreate was for these sons and daughters to, mate with one another. And that was the only way that, they could be fruitful and multiply, which was one of the first commandments that Yahuwah gave to man, to Adam, right? And to the animals and the beasts and cattle. So that was the only way that they could do it. And I think by the time we get to the days of Moshe and the Torah, then that became a law of no longer doing that. Now, when we look at example like with Abraham and then with Jacob, so, and even Isaac, right? Because Abraham was actually commanded by Yahuwah, and we see this in the writings of Abraham, which I just shared on the audio scriptures, that Yahuwah commanded him to take a wife from his own household, which was Sarai. Now, Sarai was Abraham's niece. She was the daughter of Haran. Okay? So then we see Isaac, right? Rebecca is given to him as wife, and Rebecca was his, let me think here. I want to say either cousin or niece. Something like that. And then with Jacob, Jacob, he ended up again in his own, household, his family, his mother's side of the family. And he married Rachel and Leah and Rahel, sisters, but they were also his, I want to say cousins or something like that. So my point is that even though they stayed within their family line, they weren't brothers and sisters or mothers and fathers or anything like that, which is what the Torah was referring to in terms of incest. And it says it actually specifically, it's outlined in Leviticus about not lying with your mother or your father or, your father's wife, your mother's husband, your brother, your sister, things like that. What we don't see mentioned is cousins, right? Or second cousins or third cousins or nieces or nephews and things like that. So my understanding to that is that that was acceptable. What was considered incest in those times was, again, what I said, parents, siblings, things like that. Now, the only account we do see, which I, always just kind of like, no judgment, but, it always kind of gave me this feeling of like, wow, was the account of Lot with his two daughters, where both daughters slept with Lot, their father, in order to preserve the seed. So, And I recently learned in the writings of Abraham that supposedly that was commanded by Yahuwah to do. So I don't know. But anyways, that's the only time that we see that. Okay. So anyways, again, looking back at the very beginning, the only way to have been fruitful, multiply, and procreate, and fill the earth, they had to do that, right? Up to a certain point. So anyways, I'll get to why I believe polygamy was common and accepted, and maybe even accepted in Yahuwah's eyes. I'll get to that here in just a little bit. So before I do, I want to just kind of share briefly. I did some research online, because then I got to thinking, if polygamy was common and accepted amongst Yahuwah's people, okay? If it was even possibly, now I'm not saying yes or no. I don't know if polygamy was a part of Yahuwah's design and plan, or if it was man's, and then all these people ended up being in sin. I still don't know. All I know is I see it throughout Scripture. And so the thing is, though, I got to thinking, if polygamy, right, which I don't even know if that's what they called it back then, that's what we call it today, but if polygamy was common and widely accepted, and if it is, let's just say Yahuwah's plan or design, maybe, this is something that was always supposed to be, even in our time. And I know that's really weird and odd and strange to think. Stay with me. And I'm not condoning this either way. I'm not saying either way. I still don't have, I don't know. Okay, I'm just going off of what I've studied thus far and what I've seen in the Scriptures. So I'm not here saying we should all be in polygamous marriages or we shouldn't be. That's not where I'm going with this. Again, I'm just, it's a topic that I have been, curious about, having a marriage ministry and talking about everything marriage. This was something that I at some point I had to talk about because it has to do with marriage and relationships. So, but what I was getting to was, if this was something that was so common and widely accepted, is this something that maybe should be happening in our times? And why is it that in our times, and specifically in our country, in the United States and in North America, or the Western, cultures, why is it illegal, right? I was really curious about that. Why is polygamy illegal? So I came across something, and there were several things that popped up, but this was the one that was highlighted to me. So why is polygamy illegal in the U.S.? So it says one of the main reasons for polygamy to be illegal within the U.S. is the potential abuse, or the potential for abuse and exploitation within a polygamous marriage or relationships. In the case of a husband with multiple wives, so polygamy, this can lead to unequal power dynamics and a lack of autonomy autonomy for the wives. Okay, so that was the definition or response that I got that made the most sense as to why polygamy is illegal in our country in these times. And even then, I still feel like there was a lot of things left unsaid there. I wish that there was a better answer and just, more information in regards to that, right? Because and really when you think about it too, right? When you look at the condition of our society in terms of relationships and marriages, when you think about it, in a way, we kind of are polygamous, because I feel like marriage covenants, being valued and being upheld to one man, one woman, and all these things are not honored these days, right? marriage has been devalued to the point that we have individuals that just go around and sleep with different individuals, or get married and then divorce and then marry again, and then you see the condition of the relationships and marriages that have been for decades and decades, that really when you really think about it, in a way we are polygamous. We have had multiple partners, we have had multiple spouses, maybe not at the same time, such as how we see in the Tanakh, and I know that I said in the beginning that if you divorced and then remarried, that's not polygamy, and that if you are widowed and then you remarry, it's not polygamy, because polygamy is having spouse at the same time. But still, you still have more than one spouse, just not at the same time. So we've all had at some point multiple partners, multiple spouses. So in a way, it's a form of polygamy, right? It's a form of it. It's having multiple partners, multiple spouses, maybe just not on one. And in some cases, some people sleep with, 3 or 4 people, for example, at the same time. They see one person one night, and then the next night or a couple nights later, they're with the other, So, and the thing is, we have to look at it this way. Even though I've talked about this before, where I've said, I've explained that the consummation between a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, is the seal of their marriage union. That's the seal in Yahuwah's eyes. And I explained that in a recent episode of re-examining marriage through the scriptures or through the Torah. So we know that that's the seal. That's what makes a marriage union permanent for husband and wife, okay, in Yahuwah's eyes. And so I've had people ask me, well, if that's the case, and I've, for example, there are individuals out there that have slept with different people, does that mean that every single person they slept with is their spouse? And I said, well, no, because Yahuwah ordains a spouse for us. So when we come together with that person he's called us to be with, that's what seals it, the consummation. If we just go out and sleep with whoever, and these people are not our spouses, we're just creating soul ties. We're creating ungodly soul ties, okay? But the more I've studied this, the further I've studied this, what if Yahuwah does see that every time we sleep with somebody, we consummate with that person and it becomes a marriage union in his eyes, spiritually? Then that would make us polygamous, because now we have multiple spouses. Just thoughts, okay? These are just things that I've been thinking about and looking at. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but these are just things that I'm looking at. The more that I study the Word, especially diving further into the Apocrypha, the more questions I have, and the more things I just kind of, have to kind of look at it and consider it, So again, why were polygamous marriages so common within the Tanakh? Didn't Yahuwah create the marriage union or covenant to be one man and one woman, as we saw with the first marriage covenant, Adam and Eve? Why is it? Okay, so this is the next thing. Why is it that polygyny, so again, polygyny is a husband having multiple wives. Why is it that polygyny was more common than polyandry? And again, polyandry is a wife having multiple husbands at the same time, right? Another question that came up for me is, why is a woman bound to her husband through the Torah and not a husband bound to his wife? Why are only husbands allowed to give a bill of divorcement or put his wife away, but not the other way around, to where the wife wasn't really allowed to give a bill of divorcement or put her husband away? We don't see that anywhere. As I studied this, I did not see this anywhere in the Torah or anywhere in the scriptures of a wife being able to put her husband away or give him a bill of divorcement. What we do see is that husbands could give a bill of divorcement to their wives or put them away on grounds of whoring or adultery, which we see that echoed in the Brit Hadasha, right, in the New Testament. So these were questions that came up. And let me just so there's only really 2 or 3 here, but let me just kind of go through them one by one. So why was polygamy more common than polyandry? And my answer to this is the theory and opinion that I'm going to share as to why more than likely polygamy was widely accepted and common back in those times. So I'll answer this question when I go into that. Why is it a woman was bound to her husband through the Torah and not a husband really bound to his wife through the Torah? And why is it that a husband was allowed to put his wife away, but not a wife put her husband away? After studying this, my understanding and my opinion to this, my answer to this is because a husband is appointed to be the leader of the marriage, the home, the family, and he is the head of the wife. I believe that because he's the head of the wife and the leader, he has grounds to make that decision. Because the wife is submitted to the husband, because the husband is her head, and so on, I believe that's why the wife was not able to make that type of decision. That's my understanding per scripture, per Torah, and just what I've found. I'm not saying that's correct or it's incorrect. I don't know. That's just my understanding to that. And in fact, the only time we see anything close to that is in the Brit Hadasha when YHWH met the Samaritan woman who had 5 husbands. Now, we don't know specifically how she had 5 husbands. It doesn't go into detail. But we know that he says to her, you've had 5 husbands and the one you're with now is not your husband. So that is the only time, the only example we see in scripture where a woman technically had 5 husbands, but it doesn't necessarily mean she was in a polyandrous marriages, because it just says she had 5 husbands. It can mean that she married and maybe the husband died and then she remarried, or maybe she divorced the husband or the husband put her away and she went ahead and remarried, even though YHWH says that if a man puts a wife away, that wife, if she remarries, both her and that new husband have committed adultery, because she's bound to her husband, to her first husband, or to the one Yah ordained for her. She's bound to that husband forever, for the rest of her life. That's why I believe YHWH says that if you divorce, right, from the person that Yahuwah brought you together with, the woman technically was not allowed to remarry again. Okay, even though I've talked about remarriage and I've said that remarriage is allowed with the exception that you were married to somebody you were never supposed to be with. Okay, so that's the difference there, and I hope I'm making sense. I hope I'm not losing anybody in this. But anyways, the Samaritan woman is the only example we see in scripture of a woman that had multiple husbands. However, again, it doesn't really fall under polygamy, because I don't believe that she was with these 5 husbands at the same time. I believe she just was married at 5 different times, is what I believe. Okay, so that's the only example, and it's not even, again, falls under polygamy. So, but yeah, my answer to that is because a husband is the head of the wife. He's her covering. He's appointed to be the leader and of the home, the marriage, and the wife. I believe that's why the husband has that authority or that grounds to do that, but the wife does not. That is my understanding in terms of that. So, all right, let me look at my notes here. Okay, I already spoke about that. Okay. All right, so it looks like, looking at my notes here, I went over. Okay, yeah, so I explained what polygamy means, what it looks like, what was more common in the Tanakh, and my opinions on, was this man's design, or plan, or was this Yahuwah's, so the only thing I haven't really spoken about yet is my theory and my opinion as to why polygamy took place. Why was it so common and widely accepted, but not really so much? We don't really see it so much in the Brit Hadasha, and we absolutely don't see it in our times, and it's actually illegal in our times. So my opinion and my theory to this was for the purpose of procreation. So again, one of the first commandments that Yahuwah gave to man was to be fruitful and multiply, okay? That was a huge thing, and I believe still is to this day, being fruitful and multiply the fruit of the womb, having as many children as possible, is Yahuwah's design. It's what he created and what he called for. Even to this day, I believe that we are to be fruitful and multiply according to his will, because it's different for all of us, right? Now, my understanding to this, as I came to the understanding of, okay, I think this was allowed for the purpose of procreating. And as I came to that understanding, I started to kind of dive a little bit deeper. And so this is my understanding of this, why polygamy. Okay, so now I'm answering the question from before. Why was polygamy more common and allowed, but not polyandry? Okay, here's my opinion to this and my understanding. I think the reason why polygamy was more common and accepted was because men have the ability, right, because they carry the seed. So think about it, and I actually talked about this briefly in another episode. Yahuwah created men to carry the seed, right, which is the sperm. And the way men's reproductive system works is men daily are producing sperm, okay? Men have tons and tons of sperm, okay? Tons, like they make it every day, new sperm. And just in one ejaculation that a man produces is a ton of sperm. I mean, thousands to millions, okay? When you look at a woman's reproductive system, when a female is born, she's born with all the eggs she'll ever have. We don't create and make new eggs on a daily basis or once a month. All the eggs we'll ever have are in our ovaries, and they are an egg is released once a month. And in fact, when you think about it as well, women are fertile up into a certain point of their lives, to about 40s or 50s, which is when we reach menopause. Men, however, are pretty much fertile their whole lives. It might decline a little bit, but they're always making sperm. I have even heard of real life stories of men in their 60s and 70s impregnating women who were still fertile. Men can make babies well into their 70s and 80s, right? Which is the average lifespan of today. Women, however, and I don't know why Yahuwah made it this way. I really don't. But for women, it's different. We come to a point earlier in our lives where we stop being fertile, unless Yahuwah says otherwise. So I'm saying scientifically speaking. So with that being said, when you look at a polygamous marriage, but one that is polyandry, where it is a husband with multiple wives, he would be able to impregnate each one of those wives, unless one was barren. And if one was barren, then he still had the ability to still obtain children through the other wives that he had. When you look at a polygamous marriage that is under polyandry, where it's a woman and multiple husbands, this is not the case, because there's only one wife and multiple husbands, meaning that one of the husbands would only be able to impregnate the wife and then wait 9 months. And then afterward, then the other husband would be able to then go in unto her and hopefully conceive. And then it's a longer process, and it's completely different. So it would have been harder and taken longer if it was polyandry, to where a wife had more than one husband. It would be difficult in terms of procreating, to whereas a husband having multiple wives, say he has 6 wives, he can have all 6 of those wives pregnant at the same time, right? So it just is a process that's a lot quicker and kind of makes more sense when you think about it, versus having a wife with multiple husbands. It would take much more time to procreate and have children and raise up seed and so on and so forth. Now, another reason why I came to this theory is some other examples or accounts that we actually see within scriptures. So, for example, one that comes to mind, Hannah's story in 1 Samuel. Her husband had 2 wives, her and Peninnah, and for whatever reason, Hannah was barren and Peninnah was not. And maybe that's the reason why her husband, I just remembered his name, Elkanah. Maybe that's why Elkanah had 2 wives. Maybe he married Hannah first, and because she was barren, he took another wife, right? To have, probably more than likely for that purpose, to have children, because again, that was a big thing in those times. Because remember, one of the first commandments Yahuwah gave, be fruitful, multiply. So if a man wasn't able to have children by one wife, then maybe he needed to take another wife in order to raise up seed. Okay. Another example we see is Onan. Onan was the son of Judah. And the example we see is that Judah's oldest son married, but because he was wicked in the eyes of Yahuwah smote him, and smote him before he was able to have children, either before he was able to have children or he didn't want to have children. It was one of those two. And so then the second brother, Judah said, go in unto your brother's wife to preserve seed, to obtain seed, to carry, the family lineage, basically. This was Onan. And Onan was disobedient and spilled his seed on the ground instead of, spilling his seed into, the womb of the wife. So he basically went against Yahuwah and his father's commandment, or command, and Yahuwah smote him. So that's another example of, obviously obtaining seed, and again, procreating, being fruitful, multiply was a big deal. Okay, and it still is in Yahuwah's eyes. He doesn't change. Some other examples: Abraham and Sarah. Right, Sarah was barren for years and years, and at one point, Sarah told Abraham, "Take Hagar and go in unto her, so that we can have seed through her, so that we can have children through her." Right? So Abraham ended up taking another wife for the purpose of procreating, which again we learn in Jashar, in the writings of Abraham, that Abraham actually had multiple wives apart from Sarah and Hagar. Again, that's why I'm saying the more that I read in the Apocrypha, which for those of you who don't know, I am sharing a lot of these books on the audio scriptures, the more we see a lot of details that are left out from the 66 canonical scriptures. Okay, so I've actually learned that these men, these patriarchs, these great men of faith, and these men were so loved by Yahuwah, they had multiple wives. In fact, there's an account, again, it's either in the writings of Abraham or Jashar, Noah. Noah was also a man that had multiple wives. And we see, again, I can't remember which book, if it's Jashar or the writings of Abraham, where Yahuwah instructs him to take another wife, another particular woman, And that is the mother. She was the mother of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay? So, and they were the ones that lived, right? There was only 8 of them that survived the flood. They were the ones that were preserved. But Noah also had multiple wives. David, he had multiple wives, right? Again, King Solomon had many hundreds of wives and concubines, I think even in the writings of Abraham, his father Terah had multiple wives. And in fact, the same night that Abraham was born, one of his concubines had given birth to a son. So my point to all of this is that procreation, okay, raising up seed, being fruitful and multiplying, which was, again, Yahuwah's first commandment, pretty much given to man. And again, it's still something that he desires, and it's his plan. That's what we see. And I believe that's why polygamy, specifically polygamy, right, a man with multiple wives, was common and widely accepted, was for, I believe, the sole purpose to procreate. That is my understanding to that. And I have been thinking about this for a long time. I've been praying, like Yahuwah, is marriage just one man and one woman? Is that your true design? Or, if it isn't, can you reveal this to me? If it is, then why was polygamy such a huge thing, especially within the Tanakh? Why was this, and just trying to find these answers, because, and then the thing is, if it is a part of Yahuwah's design and plan, then why isn't it happening today? Now, I can tell you this, the answer to that is, our government, of course, wants to control us. That I think right now we have 7 billion people in this world, maybe more, I don't know. And that one of the main agendas, if you will, that have been going on for, I feel, some time, has been to lessen our population and just kind of go against one of the very first commandments Yahuwah gave, which was to be fruitful and multiply. Because remember, everything that Yahuwah says is good and is a blessing, the world sees as a burden and a curse. Everything that is a curse and that is sinful in Yahuwah's eyes, the world deems as good. So if Yahuwah calls for us to be fruitful and multiply, the world is going to call for us to do the opposite. So that could be another reason why, maybe polygamy became illegal. Although, again, it doesn't really stop a man per se going from woman to woman, married or not, and impregnating them, which, let's face it, we see that all the time. Sadly, how many women are out there that are single moms? How often do we see men kind of, in a sense, going around carelessly and, sleeping with women and making babies and, so it's really, in a sense, no different, but under different circumstances and different, so while our country specifically deems polygamy as illegal, in a way, a form of it still exists today, in the ways that I shared earlier and what I just described now, So I believe that's everything, brothers and sisters. I think that's everything that I wrote down, everything that I have gathered concerning this topic. I had mentioned in some previous episodes, I would mention briefly about this topic, and that it was something I was still praying about, still researching, still just really taking a deep look at, a deeper dive into the Word. And I finally gathered everything I needed, and it came to me at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. Or 5:30 in the morning, and I was like, okay, I gotta share this before it all goes, because sometimes it just hits me in the moment, and I gotta either get it written down or record it before I lose it, and so yeah, praise Yah. I really do feel that is a really, really big possibility as to why polygamy was a thing back in those times, was the purpose of procreation. Now, I do continue to pray that if I am missing the mark or I'm incorrect with that Yahuwah would reveal it to me if in His will, if it's something He wants to reveal. May He forgive me if I am incorrect in my understanding of the scriptures and things like that. And again, I'm not pro-polygamy. I'm not against it either, because we do see it in scripture. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to go and be, number one, because I'm a woman. Again, polyandry was not common, right? It wasn't what you see in the scriptures. It's the polygamy that you see. Polygamy is just a broader term and description of what it is, but polygamy is a man having more than one wife at the same time. Polyandry is a wife having more than one husband at the same time. And we don't see that in the scriptures. What we see is polygamy. So I'm not saying that I would go and do something like that. I'm not necessarily condoning it either, because again, I don't really know what the Father's thoughts are on this. Does He consider it sinful? Because His original plan for marriage is one man, one woman. And again, that's also kind of what we see reflected in the Brit Hadasha. Or was His plan, for men to have multiple wives? I don't know, because I don't see that directly answered in the scripture. What I do see is that it was common and it was widely accepted, And again, my theory as to why it falls more on the man, to where it seems like men could do it but not women. Again, number one, because of procreation, and number two, because men were appointed the head of the marriage and the wives and the homes, and they're appointed the leaders. That's what I believe. That's my understanding based off of scripture that we have and that we see. So if I have anything else that comes to mind, anything else that pops out from scripture, or if Yahuwah reveals it to me and it's different than what I've shared, then I will definitely come back on and do another episode. Now, again, this is just me sharing my thoughts on this topic. This is not me saying this is what it is, this is why, this is this is that. That's not what I'm saying. This is not a teaching. This is just me sharing my thoughts, because it has to do with marriage. This is a marriage ministry. I have explored all areas of marriage, and this was something that piqued my curiosity, my interest, and I really wanted a better understanding. And so this is just me sharing my thoughts, my understanding as I have studied the scriptures, and I'm not saying it's correct, and I'm not saying it's incorrect. So, because I know that this is kind of a topic that is, call it what you want, sensitive, or just kind of one of those where people are silent on it and don't, you know what I mean? Or people don't really want to bring it up or talk about it. But you know what? If it's in scripture, why shouldn't we? It's clear. Now I will say in the 66 canonical scriptures, okay, so the Tanakh and the Brit Hadasha, we see examples of what's considered polygamy, right, or polygamy to be more specific, but it doesn't go into great detail about it. It's just there. Like, I remember as a Christian, and when I was like in the beginning of my walk, and I would see like, oh, okay, Abraham was married to Sarah, but then he took Hagar as wife as well. Was I the only one that was like, well, why does he now have two wives? Like, did it ever cross anybody else's mind? Like, why is that? And you actually don't see too much of that You don't see it explained. You don't see anything like that. In fact, even when you go into the Torah, when the Torah was given again concerning that area, it never said anything about that, a man can't take more than one wife. You know what I mean? That was never specified. You see other things, but that particular was never specified. Even though the further along you go, like as you get into the YHWH's days, it didn't seem as common, right? But the more that I read the Apocrypha, so for those of you who are not familiar, the Apocrypha are the books that were removed from, like, for example, the 1599 Geneva, the 1611 KJV. They were a part of, what many call the Bible. And then they were removed. And I believe, my personal opinion, they were removed because they hold a lot of truth. I've studied a lot of these books. I'm now reading them here on the podcast. And we see so much more detail. We get a better understanding. We see a lot of the gaps being filled in, specifically within Genesis. But also just throughout the scriptures, we see so much. We see so much just being described and shown to us. And I believe that maybe they were removed, like Brother Adam Fink says, maybe they were removed for such a time as this, to be revealed to us during this time, because they hold so much truth. And so as I have continued to study further marriage, as I read these books in the Apocrypha, the more I'm seeing that polygamy was, again, specifically polygyny, was a huge thing. It was a big part of marriage. And I'm like, wow, but why is that? Like, that totally changes my understanding of marriage being one man and one woman. Right? Because again, my ministry is all about marriage, and I have shared and ministered marriage Yahuwah's way. And my understanding of marriage Yahuwah's way is one man, one woman that he ordains and calls together. So when I started seeing more and more of polygamy within the scriptures of, within these marriages, so polygamous marriages, I'm like, I didn't see this before. Like, this changes quite a bit. There wasn't just marriages ordained by Yahuwah, but there were polygamous marriages, like all throughout. And not only just polygamous, marriages, but we see specifically polygyny. Not so much, polyandry. There we go. Sorry, y'all, it's still early. I haven't even had coffee yet. So yeah, I had to look into that further and share it in my ministry, because it's a marriage ministry. And we can't just ignore the fact that in the scriptures we see a ton of polygamous marriages. It's not just marriages ordained by Yahuwah. We see polygamous marriages. We see polyandry taking place. Why? So I really wanted to get a better understanding of that, and that was the purpose of this episode. And just a quick fun fact, just because I shared about polygamy and polyandry and polygyny and things like that, I also learned that polyamorous means a person, an individual that is in love with two people at the same time. So just wanted to throw that out there. So anyways, brothers and sisters, that is it for this episode. I pray that it was, of interest or enlightening, or I don't know. I know it's, again, kind of a bit of a out there topic maybe to most, but again, I felt it was important to address it and talk about it, because it does have to do with marriage, and it is in scripture, as I've said probably so many times now. So, but I pray that it was, enlightening and, maybe edifying. And if any of you have any theories or opinions of your own, I'd love to hear from you. Or if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Again, I may visit this topic again in the near future if Yahuwah reveals anything more to me, if I receive any other understanding surrounding this. And mostly too, I would just love to know, is that his plan? Was that his design from the beginning, was to have polygamous marriages and relationships? Or was that really more man's? I think that's my biggest question that I still don't have a direct answer to, or an exact answer. Again, if it was for the purpose of procreation, which ties to an important commandment Yahuwah gave, then obviously he accepted it to a degree, maybe. But I still question, was it originally his design and plan for marriages, or was it man's? So maybe one day he'll reveal it. So, all right, brothers and sisters, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk with you in my next episodes. Shalom.